All right, let's see how this thing ends. Jack Finney's contents of the dead man's pockets in this online version of the text from which I'm reading here on my phone. I'm picking this thing back up, the fourth full paragraph on page 6, and hopefully in this 10-minute video I can get us to the end. A dozen windows in the apartment building across the street were lighted. Looking over his shoulder, he could see the top of a man's head behind the newspaper he was reading. In another window, he saw the blue-gray flicker of a television screen. No more than 20-odd yards from his back were scores of people, and if just one of them would walk idly to his window and glance out, for some moments he stared over his shoulder at the lighted rectangles, waiting, but no one appeared. The man reading his paper turned a page and then continued his reading. A figure passed another of the windows and was immediately gone. In the inside pocket of his jacket, he found a little sheaf of papers, and he pulled one out and looked at it in the light from the living room. It was an old letter, an advertisement of some sort. His name and address in purple ink were on a label pasted to the envelope. Gripping one end of the envelope in his teeth, he twisted it into a tight curl. From his shirt pocket, he brought out a book of matches. He didn't dare let go of the casing with both hands, but, with a twist of paper in his teeth, he opened the matchbook with his free hand. Then he bent one of the matches in two without tearing it from the folder, its red tipped end now touching the striking surface. With his thumb, he rubbed the red tip across the striking area. He did it again, then again, and still again, pressing harder each time, and the match suddenly flared, burning his thumb. But he kept it alight, cupping the matchbook in his hand and shielding it with his body. He held the flame to the paper in his mouth till it caught. Then he snuffed out the match flame with his thumb and forefinger, careless of the burn, and replaced the book in his pocket. Taking the paper twist in his hand, he held it flame down, watching the flame crawl up the paper till it flared bright. Then he held it behind him over the street, moving it from side to side to side, watching it over his shoulder, the flame flickering and guttering in the wind. There were 3 letters in his pocket, and he lighted each of them, holding each till the flame touched his hand and then dropping it to the street below. At one point, watching over his shoulder while the last of the letters burned, he saw the man across the street put down his paper and stand, even seeming to glance toward Tom's window. But when he moved, it was only to walk across the room and disappear from sight. There were a dozen coins in Tom Benecke's pocket, and he dropped them, 3 or 4 at a time. But if they struck anyone, or if anyone noticed their falling, no one connected them with their source. His arms had begun to tremble from the steady strain of clinging to this narrow perch, and he did not know what to do now and was terribly frightened. Clinging to the window stripping with one hand, he again searched his pockets, but now he had left his wallet on his dresser when he changed clothes. There was nothing left but the yellow sheet. It occurred to him irrelevantly that his death on the sidewalk below would be an eternal mystery. The window closed. Why, how, and from where could he have fallen? No one would be able to identify his body for a time either. The thought was somehow unbearable and increased his fear. All they'd find in his pockets would be the yellow sheet. Contents of the dead man's pockets, he thought. One sheet of paper bearing penciled notations, incomprehensible. He understood fully that he might actually be going to die. His arms, maintaining his balance on the ledge, were trembling steadily now, and it occurred to him then with all the force of a revelation that if he fell, all he was ever going to have out of life he would then abruptly have had. Nothing, then, could ever be changed, and nothing more, no least experience or pleasure, could ever be added to his life. He wished then that he had not allowed his wife to go off by herself tonight, and on similar nights. He thought of all the evenings he had spent away from her, working, and he regretted them. He thought wonderingly of his fierce ambition and of the direction his life had taken. He thought of the hours he'd spent by himself, filling the yellow sheet that had brought him out here. Contents of the dead man's pockets, he thought with sudden fierce anger. A wasted life. He was simply not going to cling here till he slipped and fell. He told himself that now there was one last thing he could try. He had been aware of it for some moments, refusing to think about it, but now he faced it. Kneeling here on the ledge, the fingertips of one hand pressed to the narrow strip of wood, he could, he knew, draw his other hand back a yard perhaps, fist clenched tight, doing it very slowly till he sensed the outer limit of balance. Then, as hard as he was able from the distance, he could drive his fist against the glass. If it broke, his fist smashing through, he was safe. He might cut himself badly, and probably would, but with his arm inside the room, he would be more secure. But if the glass did not break, the rebound, flinging his arm back, it would topple him off the ledge. He was certain of that. He tested his plan. The fingers of his left hand claw-like on the little stripping. He drew back his other fist until his body began teetering backward. But he had no leverage now. He could feel that there would be no force to his swing, and he moved his fist slowly forward till he rocked forward on his knees again and could sense that this swing would carry its greatest force. Glancing down, however, measuring the distance from his fist to the glass, he saw it was less than 2 feet. It occurred to him that he could raise his arm over his head to bring it down against the glass, but experimenting in slow motion, he knew it would be an awkward, girl-like blow without the force of a driving punch and not nearly enough to break the glass. Facing the window, he had to drive a blow from the shoulder. He knew now at a distance of less than 2 feet, and he didn't know whether it would break through the heavy glass. It might. I mean, he could picture it happening. He could feel it in the nerves of his arm, and it might not. He could feel that too. Feel his fist striking this glass and being instantaneously flung back by the unbreaking pain. Feel the fingers of his other hand breaking loose, nails scraping along the casing as he fell. He waited, arm drawn back, fist balled, but in no hurry to strike. This pause, he knew, might be an extension of his life. And to live even a few seconds longer, he felt, even out here on this ledge in the night, was infinitely better than to die a moment earlier than he had to. His arm grew tired, and he brought it down. Then he knew that it was time to make the attempt. He could not kneel here hesitating indefinitely till he lost all courage to act, waiting till he slipped off the ledge. Again, he drew back his arm, knowing this time that he would not bring it down till he struck, his elbow protruding over Lexington Avenue far below. The fingers of his other hand pressed down bloodlessly tight against the narrow stripping. He waited, feeling the sick tenseness and terrible excitement building. It grew and swelled toward the moment of action, his nerves tautening. He thought of Claire, just a wordless, yearning thought, and then drew his arm back just a bit more, fist so tight his fingers pained him. And knowing he was going to do it, then with full power, with every last scrap of strength he could bring to bear, he shot his arm forward toward the glass and he said, "Claire!" He heard the sound, felt the blow, felt himself falling forward, and his hand closed on the living room curtains. The shards and fragments of glass showering onto the floor. And then, kneeling there on the ledge, an arm thrust into the room up to the shoulder, he began picking away the protruding slivers and great wedges of glass from the window frame, tossing them onto the rug. He's almost in. And as he grasped the edges of the empty window frame and climbed into his home, he was grinning in triumph. He did not lie down on the floor or run through the apartment as he had promised himself. Even in the first few moments, it seemed to him natural and normal that he should be where he was. He simply turned to his desk, pulled the crumpled yellow sheet from his pocket, and laid it down where it had been, smoothing it out. Then he absently laid a pencil across it to weight it down. He shook his head wonderingly and turned to walk toward the closet. There he got out his top coat and hat and, without waiting to put them on, opened the front door and stepped out to go find his wife. He turned to pull the door closed, and the warm air from the hall rushed through the narrow opening again. As he saw the yellow paper, the pencil flying, scooped off the desk and, unimpeded by the glassless window, sail out into the night and out of his life, Tom Beneke burst into laughter and then closed the door behind him. And that's it. That wraps up Jack Finney's Contents of the Dead Man's Pockets. Again, thanks for listening.